My dad is gone now, so why don't you get out of here too? Stay out of my life, forever. The voice hurling insults at me over the phone was my daughter, with whom I'd spent over 10 years. Alice, my husband's daughter from a previous marriage, had dramatically changed her attitude towards me, her stepmother, once she started living on her own. Then, when her father, David, passed away in an accident, her hostility escalated even more. She accused me of being a fake mother and even went so far as to demand that I renounce my inheritance from my late husband. After remarrying David, I had striven to build a good relationship with Alice. But her incredibly hurtful words shattered my resolve. I became exhausted and indifferent, finding myself agreeing to renounce the inheritance. 3 days later, you knew it, didn't you? You knew and kept quiet about it. Do something about it. My daughter frantically called me, her voice strained with panic. Just a few days ago, she had told me to stay out of it, and now, she was desperately screaming for me to fix it over the phone. Feeling a deep sigh escaping my lips, I responded in a chilly voice. My name is Naomi Parker. I live with my husband, David, and our daughter, Alice. Truth be told, Alice isn't my biological daughter. She is David's daughter from his previous marriage. David and I met, or rather, reunited, at a high school reunion. The David I saw after so many years seemed a bit worn out, troubled even, compared to his high school self. Perhaps the alcohol made him more talkative than usual. About a month before the reunion, he quietly told me that he had divorced his wife and was now raising his daughter alone. Listening to his story, I learned about his struggles, the fact that his wife had cheated, leading to the divorce, and that his daughter Alice was only in the 3rd grade and quite mature for her age. He had a hard time figuring out how to interact with her. Naomi, would you be willing to give me some advice about Alice? What? Me? I'm begging you. There are so many things I don't understand as a father, and more than anything, as a woman, you might be easier for Alice to talk to than me. Please, I beg you. I've never raised a child before, I replied. I don't think I can give you any advice. I initially refused, but it was clear that David was genuinely struggling. In the end, I reluctantly agreed to at least listen to his concerns. At first, I simply answered David's questions over the phone. About how a girl thinks, what a girl needs, that sort of thing. But things began to change when David asked me to go shopping with him for Alice's birthday present. I want to give Alice a surprise gift that she'll love. Will you come shopping with me? Having offered my advice a few times already, I didn't think much of it and agreed. But it turned out to be an excuse for a clumsy date invitation from David. After we finished shopping, he said, "Let me thank you by treating you to dinner," and took me to a nice restaurant. It was there, he confessed, "The truth is, Naomi, I have feelings for you." I was truly taken aback. And with David's confession, I realized that I was drawn to his sincerity in facing his family issues head-on. So, I started dating David, and after a few dates, we started to spend time together with Alice. When David first introduced her to me, I could tell that Alice was quite wary of me. That's only natural. She had just been separated from her mother due to the divorce, and she must have been afraid of losing her father to a woman she didn't know. Even after I married David the following year, Alice didn't really talk to me. Sylvia, a classmate of mine and David's, would occasionally call me out of concern. How's it going? Have you gotten a little closer with Alice? You guys haven't been arguing, have you? Not at all. Even if I start a conversation, it ends with just a yes or no. It would be nice if we could even argue enough to sustain a conversation. Well, that's true. I often consulted with Sylvia because she also had a daughter Alice's age. Girls are difficult, aren't they? They seem mature for their age. So, I shouldn't think of her as a kid? That might be right, you probably shouldn't treat her too much like a kid. Sylvia, who gave me advice based on her own experiences, was a real godsend. Moreover, it turned out that Sylvia's daughter and Alice went to the same elementary school. You suddenly became a mother to a 9-year-old, don't rush. That's right, it all comes down to that, doesn't it? I sighed. I felt dejected, thinking that there was nothing I could do and time would eventually resolve things. David was also very concerned about the rocky relationship between Alice and me. Therefore, we decided to go on a family trip to the seaside, hoping it would serve as a turning point. This is a beach where you can find beautiful stones, I heard. Beautiful stones. I definitely want to find them. That day, Alice, trying to keep her distance from me, started searching for stones desperately by her dad's side. I felt a little sad at this distance, but I too began searching for stones. If I found a pretty stone, I thought of presenting it to Alice. Nothing, there's nothing. True, though we find quite a lot of beautiful seashells. Seashells? She must have been so engrossed in looking for stones that she didn't notice anything else. Alice looked up and glanced at my hands. Show me the beautiful seashell. Sure, here. Wow. In my palm was a beautiful pink seashell. That's true. It's so beautiful. If you like it, Alice, you can have it. Really? I'm so happy. Thank you. Alice's face lit up. Holding the thin shell up to the sunlight, she looked so genuinely pleased, her smile radiant. Then, David called out, "Hey! I found this stone." Wait, Alice, you found something too? He must have been searching hard. David, drenched in sweat, had found a lavender-colored seashell. Wow, this is also beautiful. True. It's so lovely. As the two of us peered into David's hand, our heads bumped together. Ouk. Rubbing my forehead, I looked at Alice to see if she was okay. Alice was in the same position, looking at me, and then she laughed. It's okay, Alice, are you all right? Yeah, I'm fine. Then, with the pink shell in her right hand and the lavender shell in her left, she looked up at David and me, saying, I'll treasure these. I feel that from that day onwards, the distance between Alice and me gradually shortened. Wishing to be closer with Alice, whenever the three of us were together, I made a point to talk with Alice more than with David. We would share thoughts about our favorite cartoons and comics, she would tell me about the school lunches she loved, we would share our dislikes, and David would give Alice and me some time to spend just the two of us. We would shop for clothes together, visit cafes with delicious limited edition sweets, and go to see movies. Slowly but surely, the look of caution and restraint on Alice's face began to fade. By the time Alice became a high school student, people around us would say, "What a wonderful family you are." I was genuinely delighted. However, once Alice started college and began living alone, she started distancing herself from me again. The responses to my text messages checking up on her were often curt and short. Even when she occasionally visited home, she mostly spoke to her father, David, and hardly talked to me. I tried to create opportunities to talk to her, like delivering her allowance in person instead of transferring it, but she would only say, just transfer it next time. She left no room for conversation. I tried serving her favorite foods, but she would just eat in silence. Although she treated other people normally, I could feel her attitude towards me gradually cooling down. David noticed it too, and we would discuss whether it might be her time of growing apart from parents. But even though her attitude towards her father did not change, it did not seem convincing as the reason why she was only cold to me. The joy of my daughter's return home gradually began to feel burdensome. Then, an incident occurred during the summer vacation of Alice's junior year in college. David suddenly passed away due to a work accident. Receiving the call from his company, Alice and I rushed to the hospital, but David was already lying on the bed, a white cloth covering his face. The sudden farewell, the sadness of not being able to spend his last moments together. Various emotions welled up, and both Alice and I could not stop our tears. But I had to proceed with my husband's funeral. As we struggled to keep pace with our emotions, I moved forward with the funeral arrangements, and the day arrived. Alice couldn't even stand up to speak, she simply continued crying beside her father's casket. Wanting to comfort her, I softly approached and reached out to touch her shoulder. That's when it happened. Don't touch me! Alice violently brushed off my hand. Then, glaring at me, she vanished into another room. It was shocking. The loss of my husband was shocking enough, but on top of that, the strong rejection from my daughter struck my heart hard. In a state of shock, I somehow managed to fulfill my duties as the grieving spouse, bid farewell to my husband, and just as I finally took a breather. During his life, my husband was greatly indebted to his aunt and uncle, who came to see me, saying, Naomi, this must have been very tough for you with it happening so suddenly. Moreover, other relatives began to gather around me, and naturally the conversation turned to David's inheritance. Afterward, they each left, telling me, if there's anything we can do to help, don't hesitate to ask. Left behind were just Alice and me. I was truly exhausted and was heading to my bedroom to rest when it happened. Now that Dad's gone, you should leave too. Excuse me? I've always hated your pretend mother act. You're nothing more than a fake. What did you just? Alice's words pierced my heart. Turning pale, I endured as she continued to hurl accusations. Even when I was little, everything you bought for me, it was all just to get on my good side, wasn't it? No, And even now, you're here because of Dad's inheritance, aren't you? I heard it. I heard the aunt and uncle saying that Dad left behind a fortune of $3 million. Alice, that's not. I will never give it to you. Relinquish your rights to the inheritance. Don't ever come near me again. With a twisted smile on her face, Alice glared at me. I realized I couldn't take it anymore. As you wish, I will relinquish my inheritance rights. I'll leave this house and everything related to your father to you. I won't have anything more to do with you. Upon hearing my words, Alice laughed with a triumphant expression. I might have imagined it, but there seemed to be a sense of relief in her expression. The next morning, I gathered my belongings and returned to my parents' house. But 3 days later, Alice, who had said to not involve herself with her, called me. Hey! What's going on? What are you talking about? Dad's inheritance. You tricked me, didn't you? I sighed deeply at her frantic voice. In fact, David's inheritance was indeed $3 million, but it was in debts. On the day of the funeral, the relatives and I discussed that due to David's business failures, there was a debt of $3 million, and we should renounce the inheritance of the debt as soon as possible. Having only heard fragments of the conversation, Alice had apparently assumed that $3 million was coming her way. Moreover, she had incurred a debt of $5,000 through credit card loans. Facing her own debt and the impending pile of her father's debts, Alice was in a frenzy. You knew, didn't you? You knew it was $3 million in debt and you stayed silent. Do something. Yes, I knew. And I also knew about the $5,000 debt that Alice had incurred, which I learned from Sylvia's daughter. I had planned to relinquish David's inheritance, take on Alice's debt, and support each other as we moved forward in life. But, after the altercation at the funeral, I realized that such a life was impossible. So I told her, you were the one who said to stay out of it. You and I are strangers now, and I can't help you anymore. Interrupting Alice, who was screaming something on the other end of the phone, I quietly hung up and blocked her number. It had been almost 3 months since David's funeral. Having renounced the inheritance, I had moved out of the family home and was living alone in a small apartment. I had set up a picture of him, a vase of flowers. I'm sorry, I couldn't protect your precious daughter, I told the picture of David. I had been filled with regret ever since I had fought with Alice over the phone and ended our relationship. Despite knowing that Alice was already in debt, I had pushed her away when she ended up taking on even more debt. Lost in thought and feeling uneasy, the phone rang. It was Sylvia. Naomi, Alice is in serious trouble. The panicked message Sylvia conveyed was as follows. Alice had been so shocked by the $3 million in debt that she had become a recluse, unable to do anything. Obviously, she hadn't been able to renounce the inheritance. I had assumed that Alice had done so after the incident. You have to apply to renounce the inheritance within 3 months, Naomi. What are we going to do? I felt as though I was going to faint upon hearing Sylvia's words. It was almost 3 months since David's funeral. If we didn't hurry, Alice would definitely end up with a debt of $3 million. But I couldn't respond immediately. On the day of the funeral, Alice's words had been stuck in my mind. I really hated being treated like a mother all the time, even though you're a complete stranger. She had said this with a distorted smile. What if I tried to help her again and was rejected in the same way? Remembering Alice's eyes that day, I was too scared to do anything. I can't do it. What if she tells me again that I'm not her mother and to stop pretending? Naomi. Then it happened. Just when I couldn't bring myself to rush to Alice, the pendant that my husband had given me, which was placed near his picture, fell. Out of the blue, I decided to open the pendant. To my surprise, inside it were the lavender and pink seashells we had picked up on that family vacation day, along with a short note. Apparently, David had secretly kept what Alice had discarded. The letter read, "We were able to become a family thanks to these stones and shells that day." I hope we can always stay as a family and get along well, written in David's handwriting. I was overwhelmed with tears. That's right, I wanted to be Alice's real mother. I remembered that I wanted to be a real family with David's letter. Rushing to the apartment where Alice was living alone, I rang the doorbell. Alice, who looked terribly worn out, opened the door. "What are you here for now?" Her eyes were full of hatred for me. She didn't listen to what I had to say and tried to send me away. "You're the one who abandoned me when I asked for help. What are you doing now? Just leave me alone." She said this and began throwing whatever was close at hand. I was on the verge of breaking down under the weight of her rejecting gaze. But, in truth, I don't want to give up on you. I don't want to give up on being your mother. Yes, there were things about your behavior back then that made me think. There are parts that I still can't accept. Feelings that are hard to forgive. However, my feelings of love for Mika as my daughter, and my feelings of cherishing her, were real emotions inside me. I reached out to hug Mika, pouring out all my feelings that I'd held in until now. "So, that's why, I want to live with you from now on, I want that." Hearing this, Alice stopped throwing things, perhaps she couldn't hold back any longer. And she began to sob violently in my arms while she thrashed about. And, while crying, she told me that when she first saw my face, she was scared. That she might lose the memories and time she had with her real mother. That she knew I was kind to her. That it was painful not being able to accept that, even though she knew. Because it was painful, she had to convince herself that my kindness was hypocrisy. She's just doing it to be liked by Dad. The arm of Alice, who until then had been pushing away from me, I felt wrap around my back. We cried out loud as we hugged each other. The next day, we rushed to see the lawyer. The lawyer who had informed Alice about her father's debt. The lawyer told us he had been waiting for Alice's request to disclaim the inheritance. And he immediately started on the necessary procedures. In the end, Alice's disclaimer of inheritance was just in time. It was fortunate that Alice had received an explanation about David's remaining debt from the lawyer 3 days after the funeral. I turned pale when I heard that the application deadline for the disclaimer of inheritance is 3 months, but the start date of that deadline is not the day David passed away, but the day Alice properly learned about the debt. Thanks to the difference of those few days, we were somehow able to prepare the application in time. I am truly grateful to the lawyer for responding to our sudden request. As for Alice, she seemed relieved that the process of disclaiming the inheritance had gone smoothly, preventing a situation where she would have to take on a large debt, and she was in bed for a few days. After she was able to get up, she seemed to be overly cautious around me. It was Sylvia who told me that Alice seemed to deeply regret her attitude towards me on the day of the funeral. "It seems she said to my daughter, she wants to apologize but it's awkward and she can't start the conversation." "That makes sense." "Hey, Naomi. Aren't you being a little too careful?" Really?" Sylvia on the other side of the phone said a bit angrily. "Just like when you stormed into Alice's place the other day, isn't it okay to voice your feelings more? But until Alice's feelings settle down, it's better not to say anything too strong." "You decided not to give up on Alice, didn't you?" That was true. I had decided then that I wanted to become Alice's real mother. And so, I began to make an effort to convey my true feelings to Alice. In response, Alice stopped trying to hide her feelings. When our opinions clashed, we even started to argue. I was happy. 10 years have passed since my husband passed away. I was in a small hospital room. In front of me was my daughter lying next to a newborn baby. Seeing my daughter's gentle smile as she blissfully watched the sleeping baby, I felt an overwhelming sense of happiness. "Mom, you can hold my baby. Is it okay?" "Yes." For me, who had no experience giving birth, this was my first time holding a newborn baby. I didn't know how to pick up this soft, tender being, and my daughter laughed at my confused state. Well, it's my first time." My daughter sat me down on a chair, guided my arms into position, and gently placed the baby into them. "She's warm." Tears naturally started to flow. "David surely would have loved to hold her too. You wanted to show your father the baby, didn't you, Alice?" Alice then laughed again. "Mom, you holding her is enough for me."